Hi, I'm Brandon Forte, and for this demonstration, we are going to model critical thinking through a Think Aloud for a grade 9 through 12 choir setting. The musical problem I'm exploring is simple to hear, but not always simple to diagnose. Why doesn't this choir sound unified? So instead of immediately giving students a correction, I'm going to slow down the reasoning I would normally do internally and make that thinking visible. So, a think aloud is different from simply modeling the finished skill. I'm not just going to show what I would fix, I'm going to reveal what I decide what needs to fix. And so, my process today has four moves. I notice what I hear, I question what I may be assuming, I test possible explanations against evidence, and then I revise my thinking if evidence points somewhere different. Right? And this connects to Brookfield's idea that modeling critical thinking needs to be public and explicit. And students need access to the reasoning, not just for the final answer. Okay? So, here's our problem. All right? Our problem is that the notes are recognizable. And to kind of like display this, I'm going to sing Handel's Messiah, which is Hallelujah, Hallelujah, okay? And I'm going to sing all the parts to kind of make these examples stand out. The notes are recognizable. The choir is together enough that we know what the passage is supposed to be. But some about the ensemble still sounds unclear or ununified. So, for example, here's the tenor part. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Alto part. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Soprano part. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Now, first reaction. The soprano line is sticking out. Okay? And I can immediately say, sopranos, just sing a little bit softer. But that would move from reaction to correction before I've investigated the case. So we're going to hold that first reaction as a possibility, not the conclusion. Okay? So before we test anything, let's identify our assumptions. Right? First assumption was the sopranos are too loud. The melody was noticed first, so I may be interpreting prominence with excessive volume as the issue. The second assumption is that because the sopranos have the melody, hallelujah, right, that the melody should automatically be the most prominent sound, right? And that may or may not be the right balance depending on what part of the song we're in. The third assumption could be it could be a balance problem, right? Because what I could be hearing as an imbalance could be connected to pitch, it could be connected to vowel shaping, it could be connected to timing. All right? So, with these three assumptions, I have three different places to start. But assumptions are not evidence. These are places to start, but these can't be the final answer. All right? So now, let's branch our thinking. So as we can see here, one branch can be balance, another branch can be intonation, another branch can be vowels, and another branch can be timing. All right? So branch 1 is the dynamics and the voicing. Okay? Branch 2 is intonation and pitch. Branch 3 is vowels and tone quality. Branch 4 is with rhythmic alignment, right? Especially how we enter, how we use our consonants, how we releases, right? So our assignment required at least three, and I'm using four here because ensembles have different variables. So instead of three, I just want to add an extra one here. Okay, so let's explore them all. So branch 1, in terms of balance and dynamics. So the first explanation is, all right, is one section overpowering another? So if we were just to repeat that, so hallelujah, altos, hallelujah, sopranos, hallelujah. hallelujah, right? Okay, so if we replay that, all right, so I hear the soprano line clearly. You hear the lower foundation, but the inner voice is less distinct. So hallelujah, hallelujah. But the middle, hallelujah. Now isolate right now. Yes, you can hear it. But if we were just to put those three together, let's just pretend that the middle voice is in balance, right? So that can support the balance issue. All right. So we will test it again. And so let's say I reduce the volume of the soprano. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. All right. So now that helped, right? When we brought the volume of the sopranos down, that helped. The melody no longer dominates, but now the chord feels unsettled and the texture is not unified. Okay. So based on that testing, the first hypothesis is not wrong, but it was definitely incomplete, right? Balance may be part of the problem, but that's not enough to say that's the whole problem, okay? So now let's test another branch, okay? So testing another branch would be intonation. So this is asking whether I'm not necessarily dealing with a balance problem, I am dealing with a pitch issue. Okay? So, let's hear it again. So, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Okay? So now, I'm noticing as I'm isolating the pitches, okay, that the inner voice is not fully settling into the chord, right? And that matters because pitches that are unstable can become harder to perceive because they're in the middle. And I always say that altos always have the hardest job because they're right in the middle. Most people can hear the one or the fundamental ha, or most people can hear the high ha, but that inner ha, most people have problems with that. Okay, so earlier, right, I thought, okay, I can't hear it because it's too soft. Now I have another explanation. I may not be able to hear it clearly because the pitch is not locking into the harmony. All right, so now I have to revise my thinking. So intonation is contributing to my balance problem. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere, right? So let's look at branch 3 in terms of vowel and tone quality. All right, I'm gonna hold pitch and the volume, and we're gonna change one variable. Okay, so one variable, the variable is gonna be using a tall versus y okay. So for example, hallelujah, okay, that'll be tall versus what, hallelujah. You see how the tone is, so you see how when the tone was tall, hallelujah, it's more vocus than the y, hallelujah, right? And because we have a lot more space in our mouth, the tone is moving. So now I have new evidence that not only the clarity issue is not only about what's loud, it's also about alignment and the resonance. Okay? But we have to explore all positions here. So let's go to branch 4. Okay? Let's go to rhythmic alignment. Right? So even when the pitch, the dynamics, and the vowels are improved, a choir can sound ununified if consonants, entrances, or releases happen at different times. So let's pretend, for example, we look at this misaligned example. All right, so the sopranos are on it, hallelujah, but altos are hallelujah, and tenors are hallelujah. We have bass here. Don't mind that, but basically hallelujah probably would double up with the sopranos, right? So when we have this misalignment with voices coming in and out at the same time, it can sound like gibberish. Okay, so this reinforces that ensemble unity, right? When people are singing together, it's not one isolated musical element, or may not even be one or more isolated parties that might not be on their note. It is a group of things that gets us to figuring out what the problem is. So let's return to where we started and make the revisions in my thinking explicit. Okay? So the original thought was the sopranos is just too loud. Y'all loud. And when I reduced the soprano volume, the texture improved. So the balance was the issue, but my problem didn't disappear. Okay? Then we tested intonation. And isolating the chords showed me that the inner pitch was unstable, the altos, which changed how I perceived that voice. So then when I matched the vowels without changing the notes, I got clarity. So when I used the tall vowel, I got more clarity than what I was hearing with the wide. So the conclusion is not I was wrong, is that the first explanation was too simple, okay? And there were a lot of musical variables at play. So, just by making those changes and exploring all the branches, you get a group now that sounds a little bit more cohesive. All right, so you get something like Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. Right? Just pretend you can hear all those voices together and they sound harmonious and melodious versus um, what we originally started with. So the important product um, of this Think Aloud is that students don't memorize my answer. I want them to learn the questioning process, the same process I'm using as I'm crafting a song or crafting music. I want them to use that same process. So I want them to focus on these four things. What are you noticing? What are you assuming? What evidence can I test my assumption with? And then, what changed my mind? Okay? So, this moves the students from waiting for me to diagnose everything towards them becoming more independent and allowing them to listen, analyze, test, and revise. And this is the same thinking process that we can use beyond choir because this structure stays the same even when the evidence changes. Okay? So, in our last slide here, uh, I want you to know that this demonstration models critical thinking because the reasoning is public and explicit. I name my assumptions out loud. I explored multiple branches. I looked for evidence and I showed where the evidence changed my thinking. I also avoided giving students a predetermined conclusion. The reusable part is the process. You question, you test, compare, and revise. And for me, this is what makes the Think Aloud powerful. It lets students hear the thinking behind my musical decisions instead of only receiving correction. And the goal for them is not to copy my conclusion. It's for them to learn how to question, test, and revise for themselves.